evening, good to have you with us in the weekend edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, today is the World Day Against Child Labour. And so we decided to take this opportunity to talk about policy, to talk about saving our children, to talk about the rise in child labour, to talk about those who've been orphaned this pandemic because of COVID, those who've lost their parents, who need our help. According to a UNICEF report, child labour has risen for the first time in 20 years. For the first time. So all the gains that we had made in the battle against child labour, in protecting our children across the world, we seem to have lost that during this pandemic. That's not it. Experts have warned of higher child trafficking in the future as well, with millions possibly getting pushed into child labour. Some of the highlights of this report by UNICEF says that child labour recorded its first rise in 20 years. It's risen to 160 million children worldwide. That COVID is now stalling the headway that was achieved to end child labour, and it also warns that 9 million children could be pushed into labour by 2022. There is a significant rise in the age group of 5 years to 11 years when it comes to child labour. Obviously, in rural areas, it's much higher. It's 3 times that in urban areas, a lot of them being used now for agriculture. On Mirror Now, we're going to discuss policy. We're going to discuss what our governments are doing, states are doing, individual institutions are doing, and what we can and must further do. But we also spoke with Nobel laureate and child rights campaigner Kaila Satyarthi. I will be playing out that exclusive interview for you at 8:30 p.m., the full interview. But I do want you to listen to this excerpt where he is talking to me about this UNICEF report.
Let me tell you that I was the part of release of this report 2 days ago with UNICEF and ILO. And I said there that there is no excuse or no justification for it, except we must confess that we have failed our children. In the last 20 years, this is the largest increase, or that is the first increase in child labor. 8 million children have been pushed into child labor. At the same time, the world has become $10 trillion richer. So how can we give any justification about it? That is the global scenario. Here in India, we know that millions of children may fall into child labor, trafficking, child bonded labor, forced beggary, child marriages, and other kind of problems. And it is happening already. During this pandemic time, one and a half years, or less than 1.5 years, my organization, Bachpan Bachao Andolan, was able to rescue over 11,000 children with the help of local administration and police. And most of these children were being trafficked or were already trafficked to their destinations. So this is very clear that children are going to suffer the most. And we have seen all over the world when Ebola broken in West Africa. I have personally met many children and saw that they were begging on the streets or selling themselves and their bodies as young prostitutes. So this is bound to happen if we don't act now with utmost urgency for our children, because this is not simply a health crisis or an economic crisis. It's a crisis of civilization. It's a crisis of childhood and education and freedom of children. So we have to act with utmost compassion.
Well, let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining me this evening. Bharti Ali, co-founder and executive director for HUC, Center for Child Rights, joins us this evening. Shanta Sinha, former chairperson for the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. Sudarshan Suchi, CEO for Save the Children in India, also joining us this evening. If I can actually first go across to Shanta Sinha and begin by asking, what steps can we take on the state front, on the state government and central front, to ensure that, more children are not pushed into child labor right now?
Let me again reiterate what Kailash has just said. This is an unpardonable situation where millions of children in the country are joining the child labor force. All these have been school going children. Most of them have had aspirations for higher education. Most of them invested a lot, and their parents invested a lot in their education and dreamt of new futures for them. Now, what can the state do? First of all, I think the state must look at it as an emergency issue. As against Kailash said, it's an issue of crisis, and it has to be dealt with immediacy and a sense of urgency. This is about child poverty. This is about lack of schools. This is about lack of nutrition. This is about lack of health. This is about lack of safety. This is about lack of anxiety. This is about hunger. And all these issues will have to be tackled simultaneously by the state. They cannot give us any excuses that there isn't any money. For children, it is a state obligation, it is a right. Children cannot be blamed for where they have been born. Children will have to be taken care of wherever they are, and it is again for the state to meet the constitutional obligations. They will have to invest in removing hunger. In fact, the amount of money that was allocated for the noon meals scheme program has not been spent at all. And of course, we know about the outrageous factor about food grains lying there in those FCI godowns. There has been a lot of investment promised for children in terms of oil, in terms of food, in terms of vegetables, in terms of people who can cook the food. Where has all these expenses gone? I think all this must be accrued to the Gram Panchayat and transferred to them. There is a whole set of child protection institutional framework. There is just no investment in them. We have the ICPS program, we have the district child protection unit, we have the child welfare committees, we have the child lines. They're working against odds. I'm not saying they're not working, but what they have as resources is just not enough. They are to track every child through the Gram Panchayats. They have to meet every child and get them back into a system of safety.
Correct.
It's a resource for them. I think people have to invest a lot more in child protection. And of course, there is this issue of loss of education, loss of learning, and online education is no solution at all to it. There has to be more imaginative ways of engaging with these children. And that is happening in many places. I can talk about it later, but I think all those practices have to come back. Government will have to invest in decentralized care plans for every child.
You've just very well laid out the overall picture for us. Now, let's take it one by one, the various aspects of this. And Bharti Ali, I come to you on that. One is obviously a crackdown on those who are pushing children into child labor or even indulging in trafficking and stopping that. But the more important part will be to have a conducive environment where you are able to support these families so that they don't take this option, or you take care of the children so that they don't take this option. And in times when schools are shut, that's become the biggest challenge. Where do you send these children if not to work? Otherwise, you marry them off.
Absolutely. In fact, today a national consultation was organized by the Campaign Against Child Labor, CACL, that we are part of. And it was shocking to hear that from one place in Delhi, a report was sought by the School Management Committee of children who have not attended classes in the last 30 days, which is a requirement under the Right to Education Act. All schools have to keep track of children who are missing their school for 30 days at a stretch. And they found 48 children who have not been coming to school, and these children are not traceable. So where have these children gone? That's a question that we need to start asking. And we need to ask all SMCs, all education departments to maintain this data and tie up with the labor departments on this issue. The intergovernment and interdepartmental convergence has to happen at this point of time. The need is more than ever before. Having said that, I just wanted to say that, the digital divide has also really put children in a very difficult situation. we have increased more children who are being excluded and pushed out of the education system because they don't have the devices, they don't have internet connections, and their parents are jobless, are without source of livelihood. So it's a situation where we have to look at two categories of children: children who have lost both parents and are definitely vulnerable, but also children who have parents and parents have no work to do. Children have no means to continue in the education system and are therefore being forced into labor. Both the situations will have to be addressed, and I'm sure, if we invest, as Shantaji has rightly said, if we make necessary investments in the child protection system, in the schemes for child labor, this is also the year of for eliminating child labor. It's not just the World Day Against Child Labor today. It's the year for eliminating child labor that we have to keep in mind. So every day really matters, and we should plan every day accordingly and invest. We don't want to see the budgets going down anymore. Last year, the budget for children did go down. The budget for the National Child Labor Project has gone down. We need that investment to come back. The reversal has already happened. If we can't open our eyes and if we're still looking for data in terms of millions or thousands of children, then it's a very sorry state of affairs. I think even a couple of stories of children should open our eyes, and we need to start working towards addressing.
Yes, and there are so many of these stories that are now emerging, especially like you pointed out, those who've been orphaned due to COVID and have lost their both their parents. They don't have anybody in the immediate family to take care of them. It becomes a big concern. But Mr. Sudarshan, like Bharti Ali pointed out, we don't have to wait for data. But I also find it problematic that there isn't too much of data available right now on what's happened in the last 1.5 years, because that means that we're not even tracking this or acknowledging it as a problem.
So, first of all, I think if we are not part of the solution, we are being part of the problem. And I don't think you need data of immediate relevance to be addressing this problem. Till the day the whole idea of child labor is confined to history books and museum, I think each one of us needs to feel criminal that it exists as a part and parcel of our life. I think the biggest handicap in this is when we tend to look at it in compartments. There is a part of society which is at the bottom, impoverished, unequal, and struggling for their tomorrow's existence. That is the most vulnerable part where child labor is most prevalent and predominant. So I think we need affirmative action in short term, middle term, and long term. Short term is when you see what you see, you need to criminalize, stop it now. I don't think we need more laws and more policies and more framework. They are all there already. Child rights are very well enshrined in the constitution also. But in practice, just to say that let me take right to education for example. Just to say that there's a right to education and we get this child to school is a very myopic view on it. There is something much larger that happens before and after school in the society in which a child survives, which enables or disables the child to participate in the fruits of development or to be denied and deprived. Rural India, even a good scheme like Manrega, which is all about providing employment. My first-hand experience, Madhya Pradesh, Sivni in particular, but generally across India, is that most parents actually send their children to work in Manrega, physical labor, hard work, because it's ready hard cash, while the parents are also employed elsewhere and multiplying. And they need to do this by breaking the laws, by falsifying identities and all. And our inability to recognize their existential problems, that where will tomorrow's food come from, where will the health security, what about other crises, that perpetuates this. So that's at one end. Right here in Delhi, 2 weeks back, I hear the story of Gomti, part of a family in a slum near Okhla too, which where they predominantly work for the garment industry. The family is trying to augment its income. It has hard choices to make. For the next week, the food comes. If the whole family gathers, into doing bits on making a jeans, whether it's tying the button or finishing it or chopping the threads, whatever. Now, what else could this child be doing, which any child should be doing, requires our engagement in a holistic manner. Piecemeal, small time, one-off actions will not work. So state, civil society, institutions, and organizations like ours will all have to collectively act, make short-term action in terms of the war against today any labor, have mid-term action in terms of securing these children vis-a-vis their existential needs, long-term action enabling their parents to become adequately self-reliant in an income of 10 to 15,000 rupees a month of uncertain, expecting a family of five, either in urban and rural areas, to be, not having child labor, to be law abiding active citizen is height of our expectations and hypocrisy. I think we really need to take that wholesome journey. And we at SAVE both directly ourselves and have been encouraging all others that let's walk this talk throughout. Survive today, protect for tomorrow, and then nurture and work on self-reliance in the long term.
Okay.
That's our agenda.
So I want to actually take this point forward, and this is a question I wanted to ask everybody, and it's something that I speak later on as well in the interview with Mr. Kailash Satyarthi. What is it that the society can do, Shanta Sinha? There is the government. Let's just admit will. The governments will move towards it, come up with plans. Like, for example, several state governments have announced financial support schemes and education plans for those orphaned by COVID. But what role can the society play in tackling this problem?
When you say society, I think we'll have to then break it into pieces. I mean, they say those who employ children in their own homes, who employ domestic child labor, they should stop doing that. I think that's one important thing, because most often in urban towns and in cities, you have these children from Jharkhand, from Bihar, from local, who wash your utensils, who wash your clothes. I think we will have to tell them this is simply no. They have to be, in fact, punished for employing children. I think that is one important thing. The other thing about society is like NGOs or those who are like Lions Club or Rotary Club and others, they will have to strengthen the hands of government to deliver their services, not in terms of funds, but civil society has access to poor children. They have access to households. So they will have to be the link between the last worker and the household. So society has a huge role to play in terms of linking the Anganwadi center, the bridge courses, and the school extra co-curricular activities, because right now school is closed, the residential shelter homes, those will have to be linked to the households, also linking them to Childline, linking them to Child Welfare Committee. There are many institutions that are available for children, and the government must utilize the services of civil society, of NGOs to establish this link.
Yes.
Some of these services do not have enough resources. And I have just heard that a Child Welfare Committee in Vikharabad doesn't even have a room.
Right.
It does not have a computer. It does not have a data operator. These are the kinds of facilities that could be provided by corporates, by society, to strengthen all these units. Although the government will have to invest in them, at least till such time the government is awakened. On this, I think we have to strengthen the governmental resources. And finally, we should give a continuous bombarding of messages that children must not work at all. They have rights, they have to be secure, they have to be safe, they have to be without anxiety, and that the hunger that there is now in society, that will have to be gone. Otherwise, children will continue to remain without freedom and without dignity.
Right, you're absolutely right. And I believe that the government needs to be the one that leads this, makes a concrete plan, looks into all aspects. But you have to bring in all stakeholders. Sudarshan, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah. Tanvi, what I wanted to say is it's not like being away from government. Government certainly has the capacity to be biggest change maker.
Right.
But I think the ownership is of all of us collectively to be offended that child labor prevails today, and that we are risking our future citizens by not attending to it. So I think affirmative action requires that. I mean, if there's one place I think where intolerance actually should come, this is the situation, this is the context in which. And I think small actions of civil society, being aware, being informed, participate in the whole idea of democracy by providing agency, power and identity to the vulnerable, to the children, the most vulnerable among vulnerable, and then look at how many different ways we are conscious of the inequity. Bharti ji mentioned about the technology inequity, which is coming over and above everything else. This whole approach of so everybody can participate and do their bit. The industries, the small and medium industries, to make the whole idea of profit margins operating the overcoming the ethics. I think we need to encourage that following of the larger principle. Ethics and nation building involves actually bringing children and investing in their education, health, nutrition and awareness, and not in exploiting them into cheap labor.
Correct.
And
What you said, exploiting them into cheap labor. I just want to build on that, though I am short on time. But Bharti Ali, we need to also address the mindset, like Shanta was pointing out, of in the cities, in the urban areas, those who do employ these children and get the domestic work done. And the argument often given is, well, they need the money, they need to be supported, even money for their education, so they'll come do a little bit of work, we'll pay them. We are in a way helping them out. How do you deal with this kind of a logic?
Yes, and that's very sad that, even in so many years, we actually haven't been able to touch that part. And I keep saying that, we've had some great impact from Bollywood films, when it comes to behavior change, but that addresses issues like, sanitary pads. It has never ever come to issues which are so basic as children who are having to toil and, work. So we need to work towards behavior change and use behavior change communication adequately enough. But, I will say that, the demand side is something that we really don't look into. We've always tried to look at the supply side, but we need to bring the focus back onto the demand side and start working with people. I will also say that, this is a time when the governments are announcing a lot of schemes. Many of them will be setting up sponsorship funds, and sponsorship funds are not going to run only on state funds. It is expected that people will donate. So we hope people will come forward and donate to such funds so that they can be used judiciously. But to ensure that, whatever is being planned is actually reaching to children, we need social audits. And social audits are audits by people. They're not audits by government. So people have to be vigilant enough, and they have to keep monitoring what's happening on the ground, keep reporting what's happening on the ground, and be, as Sudarshan ji said, be active participants.
Be active participants, from being reporting, from being vigilant, to even guiding the parents who need help, on how they can go about availing some of the schemes, how they can reach out to centers who can take care of the children while you're away at work rather than employing them somewhere. And also, like you said, I think it's a very interesting point that you raised about the sponsorship funds. I don't think too many people have realized that aspect of these schemes. There is a part that we can also play in it. I am completely out of time, but it's been a pleasure to have all three of you join in and share your insights with us. Thank you so much. It's a very, very dangerous trend that we are looking at, viewers, across the world, not just India. But we have to worry about what is happening in India to our children. And I think for governments as well, our response has to go beyond what we have already done in terms of acknowledging those who've been orphaned due to COVID and how we will take care of them. We have to stop this trend of children being pushed into labor during this pandemic. Thank you for joining us.